I want to ask you, since it is the 1 year anniversary, I find it, as someone who's been covering this and used to have to cover it on a daily basis on Rising, that it's overwhelming to think of all that I've forgotten in terms of these events that felt so cataclysmic and like they might turn the tide of how this develops over the weeks and months and years, but which ultimately, in retrospect, had little to no effect. I'm thinking of, for instance, the Jose Andres staff killing. I'm thinking, for instance, of the 3 Israeli hostages that had escaped and were waving a white flag, who were murdered in cold blood by IDF soldiers. I'm thinking of the Flower Massacre. I'm thinking of all these instances where it seemed like certainly now no one could deny the illegality and amorality, the disproportionality of Israel's attack on Gaza. The number of statements that we used to litigate to prove it was a genocide, to talk about the arguments we used to have about collective punishment. So much of that has fallen by the wayside. It feels, in large part, we're not even really arguing about the word genocide anymore. It's been reduced. The counter arguments to Israel's actions have basically been reduced to Israel has a right to defend itself. Israel has a right to defend itself. And in this moment, as Israel is attacking 4 of its neighbors, I think even that narrative line has become increasingly vulnerable. And that being said, I wanted to give you an opportunity to one, weigh in and see if, I'm curious how you feel about looking back over the last year and whether you're surprised about how little some of these really cataclysmic events seem to have mattered, or whether you understood kind of presciently in the moment that we were always going to end up sort of where we are today. And then maybe we can get a little bit into the last week, 10, 12 days or so of conflict, basically from the pager attack to the escalation over the last couple of days.
Yeah, I'm really in the same boat that you're in, because sometimes I think like, oh my God, that was just last week that, this massacre happened. And you just reminded me, as a matter of fact, of when they were collecting people in plastic bags, body parts. I mean, it's just insane. It's really insane. I'm just remembering now, for example, when they found that you have 300% increase in miscarriages in Gaza. I mean, it's really endless. It's so shocking. I mean, I think it's an indictment of not just the Israelis, but kind of just humanity as a whole, because I don't know how the world has gone on for a year watching this take place and done nothing. And I think it's actually, it's time we put more pressure and more heat on the Arab kingdoms that are in the Gulf region that are actively supporting what Israel is doing, and have been trying to normalize ties with Israel for quite a while now. I'm talking about Saudi Arabia. I'm talking about Egypt, also that's in Africa, but also for example Jordan, Qatar, UAE. I mean, it's just really shocking that they are able to continue and act like they just don't care. It's a level of brutality we've never seen. We've never seen anything like this. You can take any metric that you want. Whether it's the amount of explosive power that's been dropped, the amount of buildings that have been destroyed, the number of miscarriages. We've never seen anything like this in any war in the last century or two. I mean, I'm really at a loss for words. And I also thought that things would have stopped by now. I was a bit more hopeful when we had the first hostage exchange. And I think that ceasefire lasted about a week, and then it just went back to more butchering. The Israelis, they've been given off-ramps, and I'm talking generally here. They've been given off-ramps at several points, and they don't seem to take a hint or want to take a hint. And as you said correctly, right now they're bombing Syria, they're bombing Yemen, they're bombing Lebanon, bombing Palestine. I mean, I don't know what it's going to take. I really don't know. there's only so long that the United States can, and the West can act like, they're just standing in the background and clapping for Israel. They're really active participants in this. And what I mean by that is, our international credibility has been destroyed. We have no relevance on the international stage. We're not going to have any relevance in the future when it comes to a multipolar world or BRICS. People are going to remember what we did right now. We're supporting Israel and taking part in that. So it's not just about what just happened in the last year. This is going to have reverberations for the next couple of decades, not to mention what Palestinians are going to do. I don't even know how they're going to begin to recover. I don't even know how they're going to begin to rebuild. I mean, the amount of, forget just the human cost for a second, just look at the environment, all the toxic waste is seeping into the Mediterranean, all of the debris, it's really just, it's an attack on humanity. That's why I've referred to it like that on several occasions. It's not just an attack. It's not just a genocide, since we're talking about that term. I really think of it as anthropocide. It's really an affront on our collective humanity. It's basically like we will chop people into 16 pieces, bring down hospitals, destroy maternity wards, leave babies to die. We will gang rape people. There's another crime I just remembered. We will do anything, and we'll do it live streamed, and there's nothing you can do about it. And that's just how it's going to be. We're going to normalize this. That's an affront on humanity itself. So that's how I think of the last year. And I think that we're all going to be the worse for it, honestly.
It is overwhelming. And frankly, I've said this on the show before, it used to be that I would cover every development because it felt like more people knowing about what had happened would put pressure to make it stop, to make Israel stop. And at a certain point, one has to acknowledge that there's no cause and effect, there's no accountability mechanism in place. And moreover, that constructively, with respect to Gaza, Israel has accomplished the goal of destroying it. I mean, the conversation now is a very different kind of conversation than one that we could be having 6-10 months ago about rebuilding and how long it was going to take people to get back and resettled and bury the dead and all of these other kinds of things. When you've destroyed, as Prim Tucker ran through in the course of his question, substantially the infrastructure of a place. And when we're looking at death tolls that haven't moved in 6 months, but have been estimated to be as high as 300,000 people, estimated to be as high as, a quarter of the population of Gaza as a whole, when all is said and done, and we talk about the deaths that come from disease and starvation and all the other things beyond bombs, it is very overwhelming. And yet, I think in part because of the reality of the political posture of the United States right now, it being an election year, and there still being, I think, some opportunities for leverage within that, I do think it's important to talk about the politics in particular of the last 2 weeks or so. And we haven't really actually discussed on this podcast as of yet in any detail what happened with the pager attack, from kind of starting at this escalation that seems to have started around the pager attacks to present. So I wonder if you can sort of walk us through how we got here where we are today, starting at about 2 week ago mark.
Yeah, so I think it's important to note that the Israelis, they are succeeding in butchering civilians in Gaza, but if you look at their strategic victories, they really have none. I mean, let's just take what the Israelis themselves said. They want to completely, basically undertake what is regime change in Gaza. They failed to do that. Destroy military infrastructure, all this stuff. They failed to do that. So strategically, nothing has changed. And out of that frustration, they thought, okay, let's go and escalate in Lebanon. And so with the pager attack, I know a lot of people talked about it as if it was some kind of cyber thing. It really had nothing to do with that. This is just a simple supply chain attack. They either they either sabotaged these devices at the source where they were being manufactured, or they basically intercepted the shipment and then sabotaged them. This is, no different from things that you would have in World War II, where they put I think it was the Italians in some cases, they would put like explosives in headsets and you plug them in and they'd explode. It's just sabotage. It's nothing cyber or anything to do with phones. Nevertheless, that doesn't take away from the security breach that it was. And obviously how indiscriminate it was. The Israelis constantly love to label other people terrorists, but I mean, you basically maimed and injured random people. I mean, I don't know how anyone, even the CIA, the former CIA director in the Obama administration, called it a terrorist attack. So, which is really, I mean, something coming from a former CIA director. If he's calling an Israeli operation a terrorist attack, that means it's really a terrorist attack. So, we go from there to assassination of Nasrallah, and then of course to trying to invade Lebanon. And you can see the Israelis, they're escalating. They're going up the ladder with each one of these movements. Now, this is, again, right now they're struggling to actually get into Lebanon. And I'm not quite sure how much I'm allowed to say, but once again, if we look at this we zoom out a second and we look at their strategic objectives, they're still continuing to fail. But the problem with that is the more they fail militarily, the more they start taking it out on civilians. And you have 1 million people right now in Lebanon internally displaced, and they're sleeping on the streets, basically. If you go look at photos from Beirut, you've got people sleeping on the streets, on the beach, in city squares in Beirut. And this is very traumatic because their parents' generation went through the civil war and, the previous Israeli occupation and invasion. So, you've got intergenerational trauma now being reinforced with actual trauma. It's really a lot to take in. And never mind Palestinians as well having that experience from one generation to the next. So, the Israelis, they have a madman foreign policy. That's what they're doing. That is a military and foreign policy posture. It's just insanity. Yeah. And they think they can scare people by behaving in an insane manner. I don't know, honestly, if that's going to work out for them. If you look at the way that, their population has dipped, I think you have at least 500,000 Israelis that were leaving last year, right? So last October and November, and that's according to Israeli media. So I'm only assuming that figure has gone up even more. Maybe the Israelis want to draw the United States in for a regional war. This is what people have suspected the Israelis are trying to do for a long time now, which is get them to come in and help them against Iran, or just help them in general. And we shouldn't forget the US is a partner in this. It's got its aircraft carriers in the region. The United Kingdom is also helping with the RAF and with the Royal Navy. So it doesn't add up to me. I don't see how you can even argue these positions from a Western point of view. Like what we even get out of this.
Well, let's do that a little bit though, because I'd love to walk through what the stated goals are from Israel, and as they're sort of being laundered by American State Department or what have you, spokespeople. So much of the online discourse has very rightly been trying to highlight the hypocrisy or the discrepancy between how Israel's escalating to de-escalate, preemptive attacks, shows of violence are being reported out, as opposed to the retaliation for Israel's first moves coming from Hezbollah or Iran or what have you. So, how are what are the stated rationale? What kind of explanations have you been hearing from the White House and from Israel about why it is that they can act with what we would probably describe as a degree of political impunity?
Well, I mean, there is no real rationale. They just keep repeating this stupid phrase about Israel is the right to defend itself, and we have to have their back. Why? I mean, there is no defense treaty even between the U.S. and Israel. I don't know if a lot of people realize that there is no mutual defense treaty, first of all, which is the basis of all military support. So it's just kind of like an executive decision that constantly is made, from one administration to the next. And I mean, obviously, the original rationale behind supporting a Zionist colony in Palestine is basically a sphere of influence. I mean, if you go and read the letters that the Israelis, the Zionists, were writing to Nazi Germany, and when they were asking for an alliance back then and saying, we'll fight the British for you, they were even offering, they were saying, we'll give you oil, we'll give you a sphere of influence in the Middle East. So, it hasn't changed. It ended up being the UK and US supporting the Israelis, in the long term. And those are the main reasons. And having a sphere of influence, a colony there, a military base is, of course, useful. But now, it's just counterproductive. So even from a neoconservative point of view, from like an imperialist point of view, it's really counterproductive. And that is to me, it just indicates kind of the moral decay, the strategic decay. It's like they're not even smart, evil people. They're literally just evil. They're just evil,
that is, I think, what we've all been grappling with this whole time, like looking for some kind of realpolitik reason why Israel is doing what it's doing, what its end goals are, and even more importantly, because, Israel's goals, whether or not you root them in a religious text or whatever, is the things that I obviously don't subscribe to or agree with, make sense for them in a way that they don't make sense for Americans, right? Without whom none of this could be happening. I mean, like I'm looking at the front page of the New York Times as we're recording today, and the top article is, after missile attack, Israel may be ready to risk all-out war with Iran. So again, you have this framing where it starts at after missile attack, no discussion of why the missiles were launched, but Israel might be willing to risk an all-out war with Iran, as though Israel is a solitary actor who could be empowered to do exactly that without support of the United States of America.
Yeah, it's really funny. I think, honestly, one of the reasons Donald Trump keeps saying that the Iranians are trying to kill him is he's just trying to, it's just trying to brainwash people into seeing them as a threat, right? So I'm smiling and laughing because that headline you just read it's so funny. It's so funny. It's like just everything is happening in a vacuum. But I can once again go back to the last couple of decades. You've had this constant fear mongering about Iran as being an evil actor that's trying to get nuclear weapons. I mean, it's just kind of like, right now you have a lot of debate inside of Iran about where they're headed, right? Because their president died, they had a new president come in, and he wants to renegotiate the nuclear deal and so on. And I always tell myself, I'm glad that the Iranians went with the nuclear deal originally, because they kind of gave the Americans benefit of the doubt. They did everything by the book. IAEA confirmed that they're following the deal, and then the Americans pulled out anyway. So you look at the same kind of thing repeating itself now. They didn't respond to the assassination of Haniyeh in Tehran. They gave the Americans the benefit of the doubt, and they once again proved that you can't trust American diplomats, which is a shame, right? Because once upon a time, Western diplomats actually cared about their reputation. They actually cared about how their country came across to the rest of the world. Didn't mean that they were, necessarily good actors. But again, there's the element of shame. That's completely gone. There's no more rationale. There's no more realpolitik, as you were alluding to. It's just like unconditional evil support from one evil actor to the other. And I have to laugh because otherwise I think we'd be crying, honestly. But
yeah.
We are in a period of transition, and I think it's good for people to recall what the Ukraine war did, how it sped up this whole transition to a multipolar world. So I guess the best way we can describe this is like a violent beast kind of thrashing about in its final moments. That's how we should look at the West and Israel.
I mean, yes, but how much thrashing is there going to be, and how bad is this going to get, I think, is the question that people want answered. I mean, you alluded to this idea that at one point there was more credibility, that America had more credibility. And I remember, I'm thinking of a colloquy recently that, we'll clip and put in here. I believe it was another one of these State Department briefings where a journalist asked, isn't it the case that, it's been reported that Iran did not retaliate, chose to exercise restraint because it was told that America was working in good faith toward a ceasefire deal and just to cool your jets. And that, I think Trita Parsi has been on the show in the past talking about that kind of strategic non-engagement that Iran has been demonstrating throughout the last couple of months. And then now that you have these new statements of, well, basically, Matthew Miller saying we're not working toward a ceasefire, we don't want a diplomatic resolution with Hamas, that now the incentives for Iran to exercise patience in order to achieve its main end goal, which is to end this genocide, there simply doesn't, there's no incentive. There's no strategic incentive anymore. And that it's American diplomacy, American political choices specifically that have sort of led to this ultimate outcome.
Yeah, I think that goes back to what I was saying with the off-ramps. Iran, if you see them as, you look at their behavior just the last couple of months, even on April 13th, even now, just yesterday with the missiles that they launched, they didn't go like completely nuts. I mean, if you really want to, and it's funny watching Israelis like laugh at Iran, basically saying like, haha, why didn't you flatten all our buildings? Like it's just so much about how Israelis think, honestly. But my point is just that the Iranians took out military targets. They didn't focus on infrastructure. And again, I'm not saying civilian infrastructure, but like just more things like blocking Strait of Hormuz, for example. That's a nuclear option that you can, keep for when you're really, you've reached the limit. It doesn't mean the Iranians like what is happening in Gaza. It just kind of shows that they are still trying their real best to kind of de-escalate. Okay, that or at least that's how some people have described it. Again, I don't know if I'm allowed to say that myself, or I have to say it's other people saying it. But the point is just that with American diplomats, you'll find this kind of behavior going back to the Vietnam War. You even linebacker, they had these operations nicknamed linebacker. The whole premise behind that was go send a bunch of B-52 bombers and carpet bomb Vietnam, and they would use this phrase, bomb them to the negotiating table. Like, so when I say Western diplomats used to be a bit more rational, I suppose I'm talking more about English and French ones than the US ones, because that's, it's really quite a unique take. It's like a legal loophole or something, bomb them to the negotiating table. I mean, I don't even know what to say to that. They think that you achieve peace through violence. It's such a contradiction, but unfortunately, Europe now follows the Americans instead of the Americans toning their stuff down and following it like, a bit more of a rational foreign policy. But yeah, that hasn't changed. I think we still have that kind of thinking in place. And when you're not providing incentives, and again, I'm speaking generally, just as a matter of principle, you're telling the other side, I want to kill you and I'm going to wipe you out no matter what. I mean, obviously, you're not giving peace a chance at all. Obviously, you're not giving the civilians that are caught in the crossfire a chance at all. And this only goes one way. It goes, towards escalation. And you're absolutely right. People do want to know how much more thrashing about is there going to be, because, it's easy for us to just sit here and talk about this, but you've got every minute someone dying in Gaza. It's horrific. And I don't know what it's going to take. I really don't know. I suppose what we should be asking is, where are a lot of these Arab and Muslim countries? I mean, it's kind of ironic it should fall to Iran to have the Palestinians back, whether it's, in any domain. Where are a lot of the Arab countries? I mean, Morocco, for example, is allowing Israeli ships to come in and dock and resupply. And even Spain, which is not an Arab or a Muslim country, is telling the Israeli ships, you can't come here. But Morocco is telling them, yes. I mean, we're really living in a time of extraordinary contradictions, to put it mildly.
Hey, YouTube. Thanks for watching. Just a reminder that this is a podcast. You can catch an extra premium episode every Monday for $5 a month at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast. That's patreon.com/badfaithpodcast for $5 a month, an extra episode every week. Additionally, please do consider liking this video, subscribing to this channel. It helps us out. It helps independent media beat the algorithm. We appreciate you. And as always, keep the faith.